Hello, welcome to Measuring Impact, Better Data from Better Survey Design. My name is Lindsay Morgia. I'm the founder and principal at Morgia Research Services. At MRS, we believe that the better the data, the easier it is for organizations to share their impact with the world. I hope that this webinar helps you as you gather information you need to improve your programs and strengthen your communities. Before we get into it, I'll just go over the agenda really quickly. First, I'll do a brief introduction of who I am and what I do. Next, we'll talk about what survey design is and why it matters. From there, we'll dive into the most common mistakes organizations tend to make when creating their own surveys and how to correct them. And then finally, I'll share some resources with you that you can use for your next survey project. So if you're new here, I'm Lindsay. I founded my company, Morgia Research Services, in 2020 after spending about 13 years in the nonprofit and public sectors. My work is and always has been about collecting and analyzing data to solve big social problems. When I was in the nonprofit sector, we often work with partner organizations, and I had colleagues tell me that they really wish that they had somebody on staff who could work to gather data, analyze it, but there were really not enough resources to do so. So that's kind of where MRS comes in. My goal is to fill that gap for people so that organizations have a partner they can work with to gather the most accurate information to understand the impact that they're having on their communities. On the screen is just a few examples of some of the services that I offer. And when I'm not up to my eyeballs in data, I'm at my local gym trying to break 255 on my deadlift, or hanging out with these two, my dogs, Lucy and Penny. So if you're here, I'm sure a lot of you know that nonprofits create and send out surveys for all kinds of reasons, whether it's to get participant feedback on programs, collect insights from community members to help organizations prioritize, check in on employee wellness, evaluate internal policies like DEI programs, and lots of other things. But a lot of the times what I've seen happen is that staff members are tasked with writing up surveys, but they've never done it before. And without any kind of background in survey design, there are risks that folks will end up creating surveys that aren't effective for their organization and potentially are giving them the wrong information. So what do I mean by survey design? Key elements of survey design include figuring out the reason why you're creating the survey in the first place. What is it you want to learn? Deciding who is best suited to take your survey. Writing out your questions, putting them in an order that makes sense, and choosing the methods and the platforms that will reach the greatest number of people. It sounds straightforward enough, but mistakes in the survey design process can result in missing data and misleading results. And if we have missing or misleading data, that can lead us to misguided decision-making or an incomplete picture of what our impact actually is. So the goal should always be to create a survey that brings your organization the most accurate information possible from the greatest number of people. So let me give you an example, the first issue I see most often. The Pitbull Appreciation Society, which is an organization that I've made up, is about to send out its annual member survey to get feedback on programs and services. We have two survey options in front of us. The first has 65 questions and is going to take at least a half an hour to complete. The second option has just 20 questions and will take you less than 15 minutes. Which one would you prefer to take? Now, I know that there are some of you Pitbull lovers, myself included, who would absolutely take the time to fill out a 45-minute questionnaire. But I guess that most of you would prefer the shorter version of the survey. Why? Because we're busy. We can't necessarily carve out that kind of time for something with all of these different questions. So the top mistake I see is just too many questions. And if a survey is too long, it's going to be less likely that people will actually complete it. That can mean someone starts it, gets distracted, they get bored and say, oh, I'll finish it later. Spoiler alert, they never finish it later. Or, like we just did, someone sees the number of questions and says, you know what, no, thank you, I don't have time for this. It's not because people aren't interested or they don't want to help your organization, they just don't have the time. And if you're wondering, well, how long is too long? Generally speaking, online surveys should take less than 15 minutes to complete, and that is according to me and the Pew Charitable Trust. So why does it matter that people might drop off or never respond? It can introduce what's called non-response bias into your results, and I like to explain this as the Yelp predicament. In general, who are the people who are taking the time to log into their computer, open up their Yelp app, whatever, and give a restaurant a review? Generally, it's people who have had a really great experience or a truly disastrous one. It can kind of be the same thing with lengthy surveys. The people who are going to take the time to complete them are likely going to have the strongest opinions on whatever it is that you're asking about. They're committed enough to spend that time to let you know exactly what they think. That means you're missing the middle. And when you're missing the middle, it means that the data that you have is really only dealing with the extremes. And in general, we don't want to make decisions about our programs or our people based on extreme opinions. How does it happen? I think it comes from a place of wanting to be exhaustive, especially if you're a nonprofit that doesn't send out surveys. You want to get sort of as many questions in there as you can because you don't do it very often. But a lot of the times, the root of the problem is that there's no clear purpose to the survey. If you have a clear purpose and you know exactly what it is you want to learn, it's easier to weed out less relevant or unrelated questions that can add time for your survey takers. Second example, what do you think might be wrong with this question? The Children's Committee does an excellent job communicating with its partners, advocating in the state legislature, and evaluating programs crucial for children's success. We have strongly agree all the way to strongly disagree. Take a moment while I take a water break. If you're not sure, think about this. What if you think that the committee is great at communicating with partners, but awful at advocacy? How do you answer this question? It's pretty hard to do. So, second issue that I see a lot are and statements. Again, here, the intention is often good. We're trying to ask holistic questions, or maybe we're trying to shave down the number of questions by combining things. But when you have these and statements, it can create a lot of confusion for your survey taker and lead them to either skip the question or choose an inaccurate answer. So for that committee question, again, what if we think they're great at communicating and they're awful at advocacy? You might pick strongly agree because of the good communication, but that's not really an accurate representation of what you might think about the advocacy or the evaluation efforts. Or maybe you select not sure. But not sure is actually also inaccurate. We have an opinion on the committee's work, but we're not able to express it because of the way that the question is written. So it's not that I'm not sure about the committee's work, it's I'm not sure how to answer this. It introduces another kind of bias, a response bias. In this case, the survey taker can't give you a true response because of how that question is worded. It's confusing, you're not really sure what to do with it. And if this children's committee is trying to use this data to see where it needs to improve, that incorrect data can lead them down the wrong path. So if you have a question like this, it's best to break it apart into separate questions so your survey takers can tell you what they really think about each element. Third example, and I'm sure we've all had moments with this. Can you translate this question? Which advocacy campaigns was most successful this year? CDC, WRRC, CML, AED, PBIS. So CDC could be Centers for Disease Control, but that doesn't make a ton of sense in terms of an advocacy campaign. I've seen AED machines in hospitals, but that's also probably not it. And these other ones could kind of mean anything. So what are our options? Did a little searching on acronymfinder.com to see. And I don't know, I think I didn't mention this, but I am based in Denver, Colorado. And in Colorado, the CDC can stand for the Capital Development Committee of the state legislature. But most people are probably going to think Centers for Disease Control. Or if you're a community development person, maybe you've thought of a community development center. AED is a hospital device, but in Colorado education, it also means the amortization equalization disbursement. No, I don't know what that means. Point is, organizational jargon can be easily misinterpreted depending on a person's background and experiences. So we have to be really careful about checking for any kind of potentially confusing language. And it's really not just acronyms, right? We all kind of live and breathe the vocabulary and terminology that are intrinsic to our industries and our issue areas. Education speaks differently than historical preservation, than women's health, et cetera, et cetera. We're so used to our language and our acronyms and our terms that we often don't realize that other people outside of our orbit, or sometimes inside of our orbit, don't really know what we're talking about, or don't have the same understanding of certain terms that we use. Again, so this is a situation where participants may skip the question or answer incorrectly due to misinterpretation. So in these cases, when in doubt, spell it out. That includes spelling out acronyms and providing definitions for terms that may be confusing for people. You can do that within the question. Next example. How do you feel when you see this question? Which issues should our foundation focus on in the coming year? Check all that apply. Domestic violence prevention, legal representation, LGBTQ issues, housing and homelessness, anti-poverty initiatives, DEI, ready to read programs, school policing, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe a little bit overwhelming? How about this one? Please rank the following issues from most to least important, 1 being the most important, 15 being the least important, with all the same answer options. This probably isn't much better. It can be hard to wrap our heads around all these sort of seemingly random options to choose, let alone try to put them in any kind of order. So this next mistake is too many answer options. And this tends to happen in ranking questions and other question types that ask about preferences, interests, or priorities. Again, we're trying to be exhaustive, but having too many options can get overwhelming. You also may not get the information in a very useful way. So if your survey takers, say, are interested in lots of different things, that might pick everything. And that doesn't really help you if you're trying to prioritize. People may also skip the question. People might use mental shortcuts to give an answer that doesn't necessarily reflect their true opinion. So for example, if I know that the VP of programs at this foundation has been trying to get school mental health stuff off the ground for a long time, maybe I rank that higher to try to help them out. It's not necessarily my actual priority, but I'm using that as a way to sort of narrow down all these responses into something that makes sense to me. And then finally, people may choose or rank options not necessarily based on their true opinions, but based on what they think is most socially appropriate. So you might find that folks are not going to put DEI or LGBTQ issues in last place because they might be worried about coming across as racist or homophobic. Again, anytime we have overwhelm or confusion, concerns, it can result in skip questions, missing data, and sort of these unintentionally false responses. Remember, we always want to make it as easy as possible for people to give the most honest answers. And finally, what do you think these questions have in common? We have, what did you like the most about our amazing gala? Most program participants told us they have a great relationship with their mentors. What's the best thing about your mentor? How much did you enjoy today's webinar? And if you liked employee wellness today, should we host another one in the future? This set of questions I think is a little bit tricky, but if you are detecting that there are some assumptions that are baked into these questions, you're on the right track. So those are all examples of leading questions. And leading questions are not just for attorneys. They can appear in surveys when we make assumptions about people's feelings or experiences, or if we phrase a question in a way that might prompt someone to answer in a specific direction. So asking a question like, what was the best thing about our amazing gala, can force someone to come up with a positive, even if they thought the whole thing was terrible. The mentor question assumes that, well, if everybody else had a great relationship with their mentor, you must also have had a great relationship. And now you're forced to pick something positive to say about a mentor who maybe never returned your calls. These are hard to catch, especially when those questions are framed in this sort of positive light, because we want to be positive, right? But asking leading questions doesn't allow participants to express differences or nuances in their opinion. And again, it can lead to misleading information and missing perspectives, which is really the common thread in all these kinds of issues that we're dealing with. So how do we fix it? So the first thing that I encourage everyone to do when I work with clients is write out a clear purpose statement to your survey. Be really explicit about what you want to learn and identifying the people who can best answer your questions. This helps with the too many questions problems. If you have a clear purpose, again, it's easier to remove those questions that aren't quite relevant to the overarching goals. I also suggest putting together a small committee that is responsible for the writing, editing, and selection of the survey questions. When you have a small group, you can all check each other. You can check each other's work, you can catch errors, and ensure that the survey doesn't become too unruly. Mentioned earlier, if you're reviewing your survey and you find a question with one of those and statements, break them up into separate questions. So for that children's committee example, you might ask, the children's committee does an excellent job communicating with partners. They do an excellent job advocating in the state legislature, just so you can capture the different pieces of the different elements. As I mentioned earlier, spell out your acronyms, define potentially unclear language, even if you think people should know what it means. Keep your language neutral to avoid those leading questions. Be careful about assumptions. If you have a question that has too many answer options, what you can do is split that into multiple questions and categorize your options by theme. So for that foundation question, we can ask maybe what safety issues should we focus on? And then the next question could be what education issues should we focus on? Just to help your survey takers kind of organize the information a little bit better. And then finally, if you take away nothing else from this webinar, ask a group of volunteers to take your survey and provide feedback on it before it launches. Your volunteers can do things like time themselves and tell you how long it takes to do the survey. They can let you know what questions are confusing and need clarification. In general, your volunteers can find problems that you might not be able to see, especially if you've been working on this project for a long time. These are just a few additional resources that I have for you. If you visit my website, which is virginiaresearchservices.com, you'll find our blog. And the blog has several articles about survey design, survey outreach, increasing your response rates, things like that. I also have 3 survey-related offerings, including the first one is survey evaluations. So if your organization has an existing survey that's not quite working out in the way that you want it to, you can send it my way and I'll provide you feedback with to help you strengthen it. Data analysis services, including both qualitative and quantitative analysis and reporting. And if you really need help, I do survey project planning and implementation, where I will guide you through the process from start to finish. My contact information is here on the slide. Please get in touch if you would like more information. And so that's it. Thank you for watching. Please send me an email if you have any feedback or questions about this webinar or any ideas for future webinars. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.